Good evening to all of you. We're here to start a session on critical reasoning and verbal reasoning with Bullseye. Before we move on to this reasoning session, let's just basically talk about what reasoning is. So reasoning is your ability to analyze logical arguments. There's a tiny disclaimer here, something that you should avoid. Let us look at this tiny picture here. So it says that the argument here is well laid out and it's rational, but I'll hold on to my emotional opinion irrespective of the facts or evidence. So this is something that you should avoid when you do critical reasoning or verbal reasoning questions. Just hold on to the facts and the logic and avoid any other assumption that comes from outside with respect to your emotional quotient or anything else that we know about in general life. Moving on, our task 1 for the day is to gauge critical reasoning, its types, the concepts, how to identify different types of statements, what are the different type of fallacies. Fallacy usually means false statements or untrue statements, and then practice a couple of questions on that. So we are going to start with identification of facts, conclusions, assumptions and inferences. Most of your questions are based on these 4 types of statements, and the other type of questions we'll be discussing henceforth in the upcoming slides. Okay, so what is a fact? When I ask you this simple question, the first thing that comes to your mind is the fact is truth. But here's a tiny thing that we want to remember when we are doing critical reasoning and verbal reasoning questions is that all the things that are written in your question, they are facts and they will be considered as true. But that does not mean that everything true in the world, in the general world, will be applicable here, which is depicted here by this diagram, that all facts, that is everything, all the facts given in the questions are always considered as truths, but a truth which is applicable in general life may or may not be applicable here. Moving on, a question may have one or more than one fact. Before moving on, let me just tell you how the critical reasoning questions are posed. So you have a couple of lines, usually a paragraph of 4 to 6 lines, followed by a tiny question and 1 to 4 options for the question given, and you have to pick up one of the options. So the key here is that the passage that is given here, on the basis of which the question is posed and the options are given, is pretty verbose. What usually happens is that we get confused in the verbose language of the question, and hence we make a mistake. But the strategy that we are going to work through today is going to help us not get lost in this verbose language and quickly solve the question with 100% accuracy. Moving on, we were just talking about what facts are. I would like to tell you guys that please be patient with all the definitions that we will be learning here. The facts are complete with respect to grammar and sense. When I say sense, I mean understanding. Why would I say grammar and sense? Because there is an exception to it. When we move on, I'll talk about how assumptions and inferences are considered incomplete in sense of grammar and understanding, but that's for later. Right now, moving on, facts are independent of location. Now you would ask me, what does that mean? Right? When I say independent of location, let's move out from here and take a tiny example. When you are doing a reading comprehension, you usually start with an introduction, then you have the body where it talks about multiple facts, and then you end with a conclusion. But in the case of critical reasoning and verbal reasoning questions, the facts can be anywhere in the passage. Your passage can start with facts, it can end with facts. Facts could be in the middle of the passage as well. So do not just look for facts in like the starting or the middle of the passage. They could be anywhere. Again, they can be verified. As we said, again reiterating that the facts are always truths. They can be verified. What the result comes as on verifying them, whether it's positive or negative, we are not concerned with them. The thing here is just that facts can be verified. So again, a trick to identify facts: whenever you find keywords like assume, suppose, because, since, if, given that, in view of, and so on, all these statements are considered as facts. Again, you would be a little confused by the fact that words like assume and suppose give us a hint of the understanding that these statements might be an assumption. But assumptions in the case of critical reasoning are considered a little different. Just by the mere fact that these words are written in a statement, they would be considered as facts. Later on, 2 slides down, when we talk more into assumptions, you will understand why the word assume here or suppose here is considered as a fact and not as an assumption. Moving on, we just finished what facts are. Let's move on to the next session, the next topic, which is conclusion. Let's see what a conclusion is. Usually in RCs, we see that a conclusion is something that sums up or ends the statement, but as we learned here, in facts, that they are independent of location, so is a conclusion. It is completely independent of conclusion. It is completely independent of location. Unlike the reading comprehensions or any other passage where you find conclusion at the end, in critical reasoning, you will find or you may find conclusion in any part of the passage. It may be the starting, it may be in the middle. We're going to do a couple of questions ahead of these slides where we will identify how and where the conclusion and the facts are placed. Again, the thing about conclusion is that it is always one. As we had learned, facts can be one or more than one, but conclusion is always one and without any exceptions to this. What the conclusion is something that we already know of, but again reiterating it, it's the final point the author is trying to convince us of. Conclusions depend on facts. A key definition here about the conclusion is that the answer to why of the conclusion is always a fact. Please try and understand this line. It's a very important line. The reason why a conclusion was said is a fact. So here we get two basic thought processes. When after reading a conclusion you ask why, you get the fact. Any other statement that you try to read that is giving you an understanding of the fact that it is a reason to something also becomes a fact. What that reason leads to becomes the conclusion. Okay, so whenever there are keywords like should, therefore, thus, so, hence, thence, any statement starting with such kinds of words is always considered a conclusion. Without an exception, whenever you have a statement that starts with words like should, therefore, thus, hence, thence, automatically becomes the conclusion. Also, there is an exception to this one, the fact that a question can never be a conclusion. Let's move on to the third concept, assumptions. Assumptions can be again one or more than one. These are unstated facts. Again, they are with respect to the author and speaker. They are taken for granted as they are not written. Remember what we had learned about facts when we were talking about facts can have words like assume, suppose, and that is when I had told you that whenever you have words like assume or suppose, they become a fact just because of the basic reason that they are written there. Because in case of critical reasoning, assumptions are never written. As I said, they are unstated facts. Let us look at an important definition of assumptions. These are the statements that the author has in mind before telling the facts. Guys, clearly remember, what we read and understand becomes an inference, but whatever the author has thought of before telling us the facts becomes an assumption. I hope there is clarity about this concept of differentiation between inferences and assumptions to everybody. I'll repeat the difference once we move on to inferences. Again, inferences can be more than one. These are unstated conclusions. They are with respect to the reader or the listener, and an important definition, these are the statements we understand on the basis of what is given or said to us. Reiterating what we had just learned, assumptions are something that come before the fact. What we read as facts and as conclusion and what we understand on the basis of it becomes our inferences. Let us look at another definition which might be useful to you guys when you solve questions. What is a premise? Premise is basically the main fact or the main argument given in the passage. Now, a passage or a critical reasoning question or a verbal reasoning question may contain more than one fact. But whenever the question says according to the premise or in the view of the writer with respect to the premise, you're always going to look at only the main fact. The other fact might support the main fact or might agree or disagree with the main fact, but there's always going to be one main fact around which the other sentences are going to revolve. So whenever the question says the keyword premise, always go hunting for the main fact only and do not touch the other facts when looking for your answer. One important thing that you should remember while solving questions is that few facts plus some assumptions lead to one definite conclusion. Why am I giving this formula to you guys? Because you should remember that whenever you're solving a question that is either on facts or premise or on assumptions or on conclusion, you have to consider the other two parameters as well. For instance, if I'm asking you a question on conclusion, you will not only consider the facts, but you will also consider the assumptions. Similarly, if I'm asking you a question based on facts, you will not only consider the conclusion, but also some of the assumptions. Let us move on and practice a question on the basis of whatever concepts we have just learnt. Let us look at the first example. We have been asked to identify the conclusion in the given two statements. Let us read the first example. The FDA should stop all cigarette sales immediately. After all, cigarette smoking is the leading preventable cause of death. So you see, the conclusion here is the first line. As we had discussed, conclusion is always one and it is independent of location. It can be found anywhere in the passage. The reason why this line was said is because cigarette smoking is the leading preventable cause of death. Now this statement, statement number 2, becomes our fact. Remember how we had just learnt the definition? The reason why a fact is said becomes our conclusion. I hope this is clear to all of you. Let us move on to the second example and apply the same concepts. Every law is an evil, for every law is an infraction of liberty. The conclusion here again is the first line. The reason why the first line was said, the fact that every law is an infraction of liberty, becomes our fact. Again, reiterating, the reason why the fact is said becomes our conclusion. Perfect. Let's move on and apply the concepts we had learnt into another question and identify the premise. Remember what we had just learnt about premise. Premise is the main fact being discussed in the question or in the passage that is given to you for critical reasoning. Karnataka has the lowest vehicle fatality rate in India, and it is a state that requires annual auto safety inspection. Therefore, all states should adopt similar safety inspections. I would also like if we identify the conclusion here. Here we don't have to look for much, as we had talked about. Whenever you find a statement that starts with words like therefore, thus, thence, hence, so, the line following these words would automatically become a conclusion. So the last line here becomes our conclusion, and the reason why the last line was said, this becomes our fact. Considering that this line only had one fact, it would be our premise. In case we had multiple facts in here, in this question we would be hunting for the main fact, which would become our premise. So a fact here says, to simplify it, that Karnataka has the lowest vehicle fatality rate in India and it requires annual auto safety inspection. Guys, I want to clarify this once again. Premise is the main fact. The last line here is our conclusion. Moving on, let's look at the different question types where you will be able to apply all the concepts that we had just learned. So the questions that come are usually strengthen or weaken either an argument or a conclusion. Then there are questions related to assumptions and inferences. I don't think so we should have any problem with the first four, because we already know how to identify an argument or a premise, a conclusion, assumption and inference. There are three question types which are ahead that we need to look into detail, which is mimic the reasoning, resolve the paradox and paracompletion. Moving on to the question type that we have to discuss in detail. What is mimic the reasoning? The word mimic means to copy. You will be asked in the question that which of the following options that are given to you in a question will have a similar reasoning as is given in the question. Let us look at a sample question type, a very basic question type, just given here to make the understanding of the question easier for you. Guys, please be patient for the doubts that you have. I will give you another 10 minutes in whenever we finish the first half of critical reasoning. We'll have a 10 minutes time. Please note down your doubts, keep them aside. We will discuss them in that few minutes. For now, let us quickly complete the question types and the fallacies. So the question here says that A is equal to B, and the options that are given here where you have to mimic the reasoning is as A, B and C. So the key here is that you can see that the given options are nowhere related to the question that is given. The question is in form of alphabets, whereas you find different type of reasonings in the options that is given to you. The key here is never look at the examples. Always look at the reasoning given. So as you see, the line here says pick the choice that is similar to the reasoning given irrespective of the example. Never consider the parameters that are given to you. Only consider the type of relation between those given parameters in the question. So you see in the question you have two parameters A and B which are related by an equal to sign. And you see we have two options here that are related by an equal to sign. That removes option number B, right? But again you see that you just have two parameters in the question, A and B, whereas option number A has three parameters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 being equal to pyramids. That makes this option the correct one in specifically this type of question, in specifically mimic the reasoning. Moving on, let's look at the other two question types that are still left for us to discuss. The first one is resolve the paradox. Paradox means whenever you have a certain kind of discrepancy, or whenever there are two opposing things or two opposite views or two opposite situations existing together or coexisting. You always have to pick a choice that either solves or explains the discrepancy. The next question type is para-completion. In para-completion questions, you have a paragraph which is usually 3, 4, it may even be 5 lines, and you are asked to tell the last line of the paragraph. Remember, the last line could either be a conclusion. What is a conclusion? It usually sums up the passage. So it could either be a conclusion or it could be a logical extension of the second last line. Please listen to this carefully. When I say the option will either be a conclusion, in that case, the last line will have a summary or keywords from the whole of the passage. But if your option is a logical extension of the second last line, it means that your last line, the last line that you have to find out as para-completion will only be dependent on the second last line which is given to you in the paragraph. Now there are three major parameters that you have to consider when solving a para-completion question. The first one is keywords, style of writing and tone. Keywords, again, in case of conclusion you will consider the whole paragraph, but in case of logical extension of the second last line you will consider only the second last line which is given in the paragraph. The second is style of writing, and the third being tone. Okay, we all know that every person has their style of speaking, every writer, every poet has their own style of writing or saying things. Similar is the fashion that will be followed for para-completion. It will never happen that I have a passage which I start by saying all facts, figures and data, and in the last line I'll just talk simply. No. Again, if I am starting my line by using all poetic language and very flaunting and a set of very flaunting words, using a lot of adjectives, adverbs, I will never end my last line on a very plain note. So remember that style of writing and tone are also very important when you are considering all your options for para-completion. Moving on, what are fallacies? Fallacies are the false options. So what usually happens is that there's a very rare chance that you might get a direct question on fallacies, but again it is very, very important to recognize what fallacies are, because let's be clear here, in critical reasoning questions, fallacies help you, one, to eliminate the wrong options, Secondly, they help to save your time, because once you've recognized a wrong option, you will not be confused by it. And as we had talked about it earlier, the major problem with critical reasoning questions is that they are very bulky. So what usually happens with students is that they get lost in the language and usually confuse the options. So once you know how to spot an option which has fallacy, you will never get your critical reasoning question wrong. Let us first move on to the fallacy of wrong generalization. So wrong generalization usually happens when we use assumptions or our knowledge from the outside world and intermingle it with our questions. So try avoiding using your assumptions from the outside world into your question and solve the question purely on the basis of what is given in the question and purely on the basis of the facts and conclusion given in the question and passage. The next is fallacy of wrong correlation. It many times happens with us that even if you sneeze at home or if you have a tummy problem, the first thing your mom says is, "Beta bahut phone pe rehte ho tum log," right? Happens with all of us. So what happens is that we might have eaten outside. The question will have the three parameters: the fact that you've eaten outside, the fact that you have a tummy problem, the third that you are constantly texting on Facebook or WhatsApp. But your mom will be correlating you using the phone with you sneezing or having a health issue or a tummy problem. So this is what the kind of issue you get in your fallacy of wrong correlation options, where you have good 3-4 parameters, but the option that is given to you correlates 2 parameters incorrectly. Again, is the fallacy of number and percentage. So let us take a very tiny example for this. So if I say that in Chandigarh, a study was done in 2016 for the people who drive four-wheelers, and they said that the men and women who drive four-wheelers, of them only 4% men did the accident and 14% women did the accident. Now you would be totally charmed by this. Yes, there are statistics, there are figures, probably they are right, but no, they are wrong. Why? Because you don't know 4% of what and 14% of what. Now at the same time, if I give you the actual statistics and tell you that the men who drive four-wheelers is 10,000 and the women who drive four-wheelers is 1,000, then this quantity becomes greater than this. So remember, students, that whenever in a question you find data with respect to number, percentage, years, date, always cross-check with the passage. If there is no explanation given for these numbers, percentage, data, years, months in the passage which is in detail explained, you will have to look at these questions or these options with greater caution, because there's a good chance they might be wrong, as we saw in here. I hope these 3 fallacies are clear to all of you. The fallacy of wrong generalization, the fallacy of wrong correlation, and the fallacy of number and percentage. Perfect. Moving on to the last 3 fallacies. The 4th one is attacking a person's character. In a critical reasoning question or in a verbal reasoning question, any option that is very judgmental or any option that is posing an extreme kind of opinion is usually wrong. We all have that neighbor who tries to be sneaky at our homes and says, "Aapka bacha to 9 baje aa raha hai." How do you know that we were not partying and we were actually studying in our tuition, right? So grammar is pretty sane, English is pretty sane in that respect. Never attack a person's character, never be too judgmental. Those options are usually wrong. Next, moving on, appealing to the wrong authority. Let's take a very small example for this. In the morning when we are going to school or to college or to our coaching centers, we might be usually getting late and we are unable to find our shirt. Do we ask dad or our siblings or our dog, "Where is our shirt?" No, we ask dad, "Where is mom?" and we ask mom, "Where is our shirt?" So usually in this question, what happens is that you have your shirt, you have mom, you have dad, you have your siblings and your dog, all 5 people in the question, but the question, rather than addressing mom, they'll try to address the wrong person. Moving on, the last one is pretty easy, circularization of facts. You have to be pretty clear about these questions because these questions are really verbose, very heavy in language. They try to use very big words, but later on, moving on in our slides, I'm going to teach you a very simplified techniques that will never get you confused. What happens is in these questions is that they simply keep reiterating the facts again and again. बात को सिर्फ वो घुमाते रहते हैं और फिर at the end हम बस confuse हो जाते हैं. So always try to simplify the facts in your head and you will never come across this problem with respect to fallacies. Let us practice a question on critical reasoning to put things into perspective. Let's read this question, guys. I'm going to give you 1 minute to read this question, understand, before we move on to the options. Okay, great. So I see that the question was there on one of the mocks, but we'll try and crack this open before we practice another question. But before I tell you what is a strategy that will help you crack critical reasoning questions in under 1.5 minutes with perfect accuracy is this. Let us quickly look at this slide. What is the best strategy to crack critical reasoning questions, and then we'll come back to the question and apply this strategy and eliminate all the options. Always read the passage thoroughly. It is very important to understand the question. In case of critical reasoning and verbal reasoning, you have to make sure that you understand the questions perfectly. Try to simplify the language. As we have again and again said, the question seems to be big, but it is really, really easy. Once the question is simplified in your head, you're all good to go. The next step, read the question and find the target argument. Now, what is the target argument? We are going to apply this concept into a previous question and see what a target argument is. The last thing, scan the options carefully and eliminate the choices using the concept of fallacy. So let's apply the first step of reading the passage and simplifying it. Guys, remember, never move on to the options first unless you have not understood the question well. So the question here says that 3 airlines, IA, JA and SA, operate on the Delhi-Mumbai route. To increase the number of seats sold, SA reduced its fare, and this was emulated by IA and JA immediately. Now, the facts that are here is very, very simple. The first fact is that to increase the number of seats, SA reduced the fares, right? And the same thing was done by IA and JA. So the first assumption that should come in your mind is probably the fact that they are unable to sell a lot of seats because they are saying that they reduced the fare to increase the sale of the seats. That probably there are people who are buying less number of seats, or there is less sale of tickets in all these 3 airlines because all 3 of them reduced the fare. Also, they might have done so because they might have believed that this might work. Let's move on to the next half. The general belief was that the volume of air travel between Delhi and Mumbai would increase as a result. Okay, so the kind of assumptions that should come to your mind, or the first understanding you should have after reading this last statement, is the fact that SA, IA and JA did it because they believed that people might buy more tickets once they have reduced the fare. Now we have simplified the question. Remember, there are only 2-3 things that we have taken away. We have avoided the verbose language and we have taken only 2-3 major facts and assumptions from this question. The fact that SA, IA and JA, all 3 of them reduced their fares to increase the number of seats because they believed that once they reduce the fare, people will buy more tickets. Okay. Now moving on to the next step. The next step told us that we should read the question and find the target argument. Let's apply this to this question. So the question here says, which of the following, if true, would add credence to the general belief? Carefully read the question. It says, which of the following, which means out of these options, would add credence. Remember, this is just another way of saying make strong. So this question is just asking you that which of the following options would strengthen the general belief. Now the general belief here is this line. So basically the last 2.5 lines are our target arguments. We are not really concerned with the first 3.5 lines. I hope this step is clear to all of you. Perfect. Let's move on and move to the last step. The last step says scan the options and eliminate the choices using fallacies. Now we have understood what the passage said, and we have understood what the question is trying to ask us. And now the question will be very easy. It's just cakewalk from now on. So they are saying that increase in profitability of the 3 airlines. Okay, but this is just a circularization of fact. Whatever is said here has been said here again. Obviously, they wanted to increase their profit and increase their sales. That is why they did it. So this option is eliminated, because they're asking us that they just want to know something or tell them a fact or an assumption or a statement that would make the general belief stronger. Second says extension of the discount scheme to other routes, but this is out of scope. This is again a wrong generalization. This is bringing assumptions from outside the scope of what is mentioned here. Remember how I told you that this might hold true in general life, but then all truths do not have to be applicable to your question. So this is outside the scope of what is mentioned to us in the passage. Moving on to the third choice, a study shows that air travelers in India are price conscious. Remember how we had just discussed that the 3 airlines reduced the fares because they believed that this would increase the travel or the increase in volume of the people who are traveling between Delhi and Mumbai would increase. So this seems like a fairly strong option, but let's keep that on side and move on to the next option and see if that next option is better. A study shows that as much as 80% of the air travel in India is company sponsored. Now there are 2 fallacies here. You see, the first is 80%. I told you, remember, there's always a fallacy when there are number and percentages involved that do not explain the number percentage data in the given passage. So we do not know 80% of what. The second fallacy is here company sponsored, which is outside the scope of what is mentioned in the passage. Remember students, it's always very important to consider all the options. Never stick to one option. Like if you find the second option number 2 is correct, you quickly do option number 2 as the correct one and avoid option number 3 and 4. It is very important to scan all the choices and pick up the best possible choice. The thing in competitive examinations is not just about picking the right answer, it is also about picking the right choice as well as the best possible choice with respect to the question. Okay, now we'll move on to task 2, but before that I want to give another 2-3 minutes to practicing one more question on critical reasoning. Let's do this one question. I'm going to give you guys 1 minute to quickly read through this question and then we'll move on to the choices. Guys, please try and solve this question with the method that I had just told you. You will not make a mistake. Okay, I think some of us still have a little less clarity about how to crack the question. We'll do this one again from scratch. So the question here says, remember the first step, always read and simplify. So the first half of the question, I'm just going to simplify, tells us only 2 to 3 things. I'm going to take a whiteboard for now. So the first half of the question says that the developed countries have social security and financial base, right? And then in the next half they are saying that India is a developing nation, right, where the joint family system is decreasing or is no more there. The second thing they are saying that social security and financial base is again decreasing or no more there, because of which again the people who are elderly are facing problem. The third thing they are suggesting is that the working population should as a result increase their financial base or social security. So this is all that we have given as a fact. This should be the only information in your head once you read the passage. Again, remember, do not get lost when you're reading the whole passage, because they have sometimes less information but so many facts given to you that we tend to get confused and stick to the wrong fact. So remember that this is all that is just given to us. Again, the question asks you about the conclusion. So let us move to the question. So the question here says, which of the following one, if it were to happen, weakens most the conclusion drawn in the above passage? Remember step 2, what we had learned, always read the question and find the target argument. So they are asking that which of the statement would weaken the conclusion, which means your conclusion is the only target argument that you should be worried about. As you can clearly see that this line is the conclusion, which is just talking about that the working population, remember we had learned any line that starts with the word therefore, thus, so, thence, hence automatically becomes the conclusion. So all you have to target, you just have to understand the rest of the paragraph, but when you're targeting the question and the options, the main thing that should be on your mind is the conclusion, right? So now let's see which of the following weakens the conclusion only. Remember, we are not worried about the rest of the facts here. Let's see each and every option. First option says the investable income of the working population as a proportion of its total income will grow in future. But how is that to affect our option? And even if that affects, remember guys, investable income and total income are not something that the question had talked about. This is what we are assuming because we know what investable income and total income are. So these are assumptions that have come from outside which are leading to a wrong generalization. So this option is out of our way. Moving on to the second one, the insurance sector is underdeveloped and tends to indicate that it will be extensively privatized in the future. Remember guys, again, we've been talked about insurance sector in the question, but the fact whether it's underdeveloped or it is privatized, we don't know anything about it. So even though considering that it was underdeveloped, we don't know how privatization or whether the insurance sector being privatized or being a public sector would affect the income or the development of the nation, something that had been talked about in the conclusion. Remember, the conclusion only talks about working population having a financial base. So this removes option number 2 out of our way. Moving on to option number 3, it says India is on the path of development that will take it to a developed country status with all its positive and negative implications. So the conclusion stated the problem that the fact India is a developing nation and hence the working population should, this is developing, should increase their financial base because there's no social security, joint family system. All those facts were also given, but the conclusion was specifically talking about it. So but if I weaken this fact by saying that rather than being developing, India has now become developed, this whole problem vanishes. Because the argument started by saying that developed nations have financial base and social security. So option number 3 is a good one, but let's see about option 4, what it is trying to say. Option number 4 says if the working population builds a stronger financial base, there will be a revival of the joint family system. Now this option seems pretty lucrative. We usually call these options as Bollywood options because they try and get us all emotional and sentimental. But the problem here is that the question was asking you specifically about the conclusion. So even though this option might be right in the general sense or even in the sense of the passage, it does not hold true for the question that was asked to us because the question was not at all talking about the joint family system. Your conclusion did not have joint family system at all. Remember, the conclusion was just talking about the working population, financial base, and India being a developing nation. So this removes this option out of the way. I hope everybody has clarity on this question type. I'm going to give you guys another 5 minutes. Whatever doubts you have regarding critical reasoning as of now, whether it's fact, whether it's conclusion, inferences, assumptions, question types, or the types of fallacies, please bring it to the table. I'll clarify all your doubts and then we'll move ahead to talking about verbal reasoning. Okay. Shraddha, FIGs is a very different topic. Fact, inference and judgment. We are not covering that as of today, but we can definitely take up your doubts. Please email us about FIJs. So that's something that's going to take up like good 15-20 minutes. So we'll answer that or we'll send you a document via PDF or however you wish to contact us. Okay, premise. So what is a premise? Okay, so you guys want me to repeat what assumptions are and what a premise is. Okay, so premise is a main fact. Okay, let me scale it down for you guys, and let's talk it about something like whenever you have a paragraph or whenever you are doing a reading comprehension, you try to identify the central idea. What is the central idea? It is the main point that you're trying to make. Similar is the thought process that you have to apply for a long passage of critical reasoning. A premise is the main fact of the critical reasoning passage. You might have multiple facts given in your critical reasoning question, but premise is the main fact that other facts are related to, or the other facts are trying to support, or the examples or the other opinions are trying to support. So premise is the main fact of the passage. Again, talking about assumptions, what assumptions are? Let's move on to the slide that had talked about assumptions. So assumptions are something that we think of before the fact comes into play. So whatever the author or the speaker or the writer of the passage has thought about before he mentions the facts becomes your assumptions. After you read the fact and the conclusion, what you understand becomes the inference. So assumptions always come before the fact. Again, assumptions can be more than one. They are always unwritten. They are never written in the paragraph. That is why if any word starts with the word assume, suppose, in the view of, it is again only in the cases of specifically critical reasoning considered as a fact and not an assumption, because assumptions in the cases of critical reasoning question are never written. Okay, I think there's one more query that we've just probably skipped. Okay, Diksha, the difference between assumptions and inferences that I just told you, assumptions come before the fact. Fact is something that has been told to you in the paragraph or in the passage of the critical reasoning question. फैक्ट से पहले जो आता है वो हमारा assumption हो जाता है. फैक्ट पढ़ के हमने जो समझा है वो हमारा inferences हो जाता है. क्या सोचते हुए तुम्हारे ऑथर ने वो फैक्ट लिखा था या वो फैक्ट बोला था, वो assumption है. अगेन उसको पढ़ के जो तुमने समझा होगा वो inferences हो जाते हैं. Perfect. I hope we are all set to move on to verbal reasoning. So in verbal reasoning, verbal reasoning seems a tad bit little easier than critical reasoning. The questions are less lengthy. The options are a little confusing, but there's always a way to pass through that with precise practice and precise knowledge of all the different types of questions. Again, verbal reasoning has different question types. It is a little easier, as I said, to handle when compared to critical reasoning. All we need to know here, as was the case with critical reasoning, is how to handle the different question types. So what we would be covering here is different question types. Again, how to tackle and how to alter your thought process for different questions. And again, practice a few questions as we go by. Let's just first state all the question types that are here. So we have statement argument, statement assumption, course of action, statement inference, assertion reason, and cause effect. So now all these 6 types we are going to discuss in detail in the upcoming slides. So the first question type is statement argument. When I say argument, argument does not only mean having a fight. It also means a logical set of statements that contains a fact. So a plain statement that has some logic, as I said, becomes your argument. So this question in verbal reasoning will ask you whether a statement is strong or weak, whether an argument is strong or weak. How are the options posed? We will look at it once we move on to a practice question. Remember, an argument is strong only if it seems logical, relevant, and it answers why the logic or why the statement has been said or with respect to what. Similarly, an argument becomes weak if it is not relevant and if it does not answer why. Now let us look at a question to put this knowledge into perspective. So this is how the question is posed. You have a statement followed by 2 arguments, and then you have the options to find out whether an argument is strong, if only one is strong, if only 2 is strong, if both of them are strong, if neither is strong, and if one of them is strong. So you see that the thought process might be very similar between critical reasoning and verbal reasoning when it comes to talking about arguments, inferences, conclusion, and assumptions. But there is a difference between how the question is placed. So there is a clear demarcation in the critical reasoning question. you had a huge paragraph followed by a tiny question and 4 options, whereas in verbal reasoning you have a tiny statement followed by whether it's 2 arguments or conclusion or course of action, whatever it is, we'll discuss later on as well, and then you have 4 to 5 options for it. So how do you differentiate? Again, in cases of arguments, let us first hold on and understand the question type, and then we'll move on to solving the question. In cases of questions with arguments that are asking you to tell whether an argument is strong or weak, clearly remember, it does not matter whether it's yes or no. What we had learned in the previous slide, only thing that matters is whether it's relevant and logical and whether it answers why. So it does not matter whether it's no or yes. All that matters is whether there is a logical explanation to that or not, which also means it can be both. It can be a yes, it can be a no, but it can be neither. But the only thing that matters is how well or how logically the explanation is given in the henceforth lines. So let us clearly look at the options that are given to us. Option 1 says that you have to mark 1 if only argument 1 is strong, which means the second one is wrong or it is incorrect or it is weak. You have to mark 2 only if argument 2 is strong, which means 1 has to be either weak or it has to be incorrect or it has to be illogical. When you say option 3, if both of them are strong, now you would ask me what is the difference between option 3 and option 5? Okay, option number 4 is clear to everybody. Mark 4 if neither of them is strong, which means both of them are either weak or both of them are logically incorrect. What is the difference between 3 and 5? That is the major question. Please try and understand this carefully here, because the difference between both and either is going to help you a long way in solving the other 4 and 5 types of questions as well. So when I say if both of them are strong, it means both of them are individually strong, which means both of them have different logics, both of them are relevant in different arenas. But when I say either one or either 2 is strong, it means both of them are logical, but the logic via which they connect is same. Let us take a very tiny example to understand what is the difference between both and either. When I say both, I mean A is equal to B is logical and C is equal to D is logical, which means the fact that A is leading to B is a different argument, logical in its own aspect. C is equal to D is a different argument, logical in its own aspect. But when I say either, I mean A is equal to or it's leading to B and C is equal to and leading to is also B, which means both these arguments are true. They are logical, but they have the same kind of logic or the same kind of result. I hope you guys have absolute clarity about the difference between both and either. Perfect. Let us now try and solve this question. So the question says, should higher education be completely stopped for some time? The first statement says no, it will hamper the country's progress, which seems logical because higher education, the more the people are educated, the more the country will progress. Option number 2 says yes, it will reduce the number of educated unemployed. Remember, education and employment are two different parameters. A country's ability to educate people is different, and a country's ability to generate employment or generate jobs, whether it's for the educated people or whether it's for the uneducated people, is different. Remember, these two are very different parameters. A country's ability to educate and a country's ability to generate jobs, which means this is probably not the best, strongest argument, leading us to the answer, which is 1. Okay, let's move on to the next question type, which is statement assumption. Remember what we had just learned about assumptions? Assumptions is something that comes before the fact. What the fact was said on the basis of. So that is what our assumption is. So again, reiterating what we had just learned, assumption is what the author assumes while writing the fact, or what the author assumes before he says a certain fact. Again, the question type is same. You have a question or a statement given here, followed by two assumptions. Assumption 1 and assumption 2. And for the similar question type, you have same kind of option. Guys, remember, it is very important to read the options very carefully, because you never know if the the order is reversed. We will solve the question in another minute. I just want to explain to you guys how the order is arranged. The word implicit means implied. So remember, in the previous question, this was both and this was either. That's why it's very important to read the questions carefully. Guys, please don't get confused. The order might get changed in your examination as well. Scan the options carefully. Always solve the question first and then come to the options. It gets easier, it increases your accuracy. Let's move on now and solve the question. Let's see what the question is trying to tell us. Interviews conducted for selecting people for jobs should measure personality characteristics of candidates. So the question here is trying to tell us that when the interviews are conducted to select people for certain jobs, they should measure personality characteristics of candidates as well. Now, what could be the assumptions behind saying the fact that, interviews should measure personality characteristics? Let's see at the options. Let us look at the options. Option 1 says performance on job depends on personality characteristics. Probably yes. That is why they are telling us कि भाई personality characteristics measure कर लो. वरना वो हमें क्यों ही बोलेंगे कि भाई इंटरव्यूज में पर्सनालिटी कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स मेजर करो आप, अगर वो काउंट ही नहीं होते. Which states कि हाँ भाई, this assumption is valid. Second assumption says personality characteristics can be measured in interviews. Obviously, that is why they are saying measure it. If the personality characteristics were immeasurable, या हम उन characteristics को measure कर ही नहीं पाते, तो हमें क्यों बोला जाता कि कोई चीज़ measure करो जो measure नहीं हो सकती है. Telling us that both of these can be assumed on the basis of whatever statement is given to us. Guys, remember, it is very important to read the question direction carefully, because you see, we treated the statement argument question with a different thought process, and we are treating statement assumption question with a different thought process, and how the question is laid out and what kind of logic and thought process we are applying for each of these question types is also very different. Yes, you guys are right. Option number 5, both it is. Let's move on to the third question type, course of action. When you say the term course of action, it means how a certain action or how a certain event should proceed or what should be done. So what usually happens in these question types is you are either given a certain kind of situation or a certain kind of problem. What you have to do in these questions is that you have to find out that what should be done after this problem or how to solve this problem. Remember, there are two things that you have to check in these questions. The first one is that whatever option you choose should be able to reduce or end the problem, and at the same time that option should be feasible or practical. So how this question is posed, you have a statement or a problem given in the form of a question, and you are given two actions after this, action 1 and action 2. Again, the options are posed in a similar way but a different kind of language. You have to select option 1 if only you should go ahead with option number 1. Again, similar. 2 only if 2 is correct and 1 is wrong. 3 if either. Remember the difference we talked about between either and both. And neither if none of the actions should be done with respect to logic, whether it reduces the problem or not, and again whether it is practically possible or not. Let us try to solve this question now. So the question here says that there is a substantial increase in the number of accidents causing death and severe injuries due to malfunctioning of the traffic signals. So the question is just telling us that a signal has malfunction and there are considerable number of accidents and deaths happening because the traffic signal is malfunctioning. So this is a problem that is given to us and you are given two actions after this. What should you do? The first one says post traffic personnel at the junction, which seems plausible. Yeah, you would post someone at the junction and the problem would be solved. The traffic could then be regulated easily. And they are saying repair or replace the signal systems immediately. This would also solve the problem. But the key here is that you don't need to do both. Even if you do one, or if you do 2, it should solve the problem. which means this was a little bit tricky one, that our correct option is either and not both, because both these options would lead to solution of the problem or the problem getting solved. So we don't have to do both. Okay, I hope we have clarity on this question. Perfect. Let's move on to the next question type, statement inference. Remember, inference is something that we understand after reading the facts and the conclusion that is given to us in the question. Again, this question is posed in the same way. You have a statement or a question given to you of 2 to 3 lines followed by 2 inferences. This is just the passage, this is just the fact, this is just the data. The inferences are here. This is inference 1 and inference 2. Again, the options are in the same way. I don't think so we have a slide on that, but let me just write them down for you. 1 says only 1. In the meanwhile, please read the question and try to solve it. 2 says only 2. 3 says either. 4th says neither. And 5th says both. Read the question, read the paragraph and tell me, can you infer 1 and 2, both, neither, or only one of them on the basis of the information that is given to you? Perfect. All of you are right about this answer. The answer here is only 1. Let us look at this question briefly. So the question here says, good voice is a natural gift, but one has to keep practicing to improve and excel well in the field of music. So the first inference says natural gifts need nurturing and care. So we just saw here, they are saying that good voice is a natural gift, but you have to nurture it, you have to practice to excel. The second one says, even though your voice is not good, you can keep practicing. We cannot talk about this. Why? Because it is outside the scope. Because they are not talking about the voice that is not good. They are just talking about the good voice, which is a natural gift here, and they are not talking about whether practice would affect this or not. So this is incorrect. Let us move on and look at assertion reason. Okay, so these questions are fairly very simple. They usually pose questions from general science, general daily life. Again, the options given are very similar to the ones that are given to you as we had discussed, the 5 options. So I'll just write down what the options are. We have 2 questions here, 1 and 2. Why don't you guys read these out? In the meanwhile, I'll write down the options. So 1 says that both A and R are correct and they are interrelated. Option 2 says A is correct, R is correct, but they are not related. Option 3 says A is correct and R is wrong. Option 4 says A is wrong and R is correct. And option 5 says both A and R, both of them are incorrect. So when I say interrelated, it means that R is the correct explanation of A. A stands for assertion. Assertion means the basic fact or the argument that you're trying to make here, the point that you're trying to make here, and R is the reason for it. So when I say option 1, I mean to say that both these statements, assertion and reason, are independently correct, and at the same time R is the correct answer of A. But when I say 2, I mean to say that A is correct and R is correct independently in general sense, but R is not the correct explanation of A. And similarly, it goes down. A is correct but R is incorrect. A is incorrect and R is correct, and both of them are incorrect. So all of them definitely won't be related because one of them is incorrect. Remember guys, because these questions are about general life, here you can use your outside knowledge. For critical reasoning, we had talked about how you should definitely not try to intermingle outside knowledge or general facts which are true in the general world here. But in cases of verbal reasoning questions with specifically assertion reason, you can definitely use your basic scientific knowledge or basic general life knowledge. This is an exception to reasoning. Let us look at question number 1. They are saying that pipes carrying water often burst in cold countries during severe winter, and the reason given here is that water expands on freezing. Yep, which is correct. Here the answer is option 1. This is the correct answer. We all know that usually objects contract on freezing, but water is the exception to it. It contracts until 4 degrees and beyond it, from 4 to 0, it expands. Let's look at question number 2. Question number 2 says, salt is added to cook food at higher altitudes. The reason says temperature is lower at higher altitudes. Let's take a few seconds to solve this question. Guys, please go ahead and post your answers. Wow, perfect. I'm charmed. Yes, the answer is option 2. But what is the logic behind it? Do you guys know? Okay, so just for curiosity, I'll tell you, salt, yes, definitely helps to bring about taste and also helps to create a little bit of pressure difference, but food is not cooked on the basis of temperature. Food is cooked by the concept of pressure difference, which is provided by heat. Remember how we in general life use pressure cookers to cook food really quickly, and how we try to put lid on the pots to, you know, boil things quickly or cook food quickly. So yeah, the basic reason behind cooking food is not temperature, it is pressure. Okay, before we move on, there's one tiny question type that is left. Let me quickly explain that to you, which is cause and effect. So in cause and effect questions are very similarly posed as to assertion and reason. You can be given the question in two ways. Either it will be written cause and effect, or it will be written statement 1 or 2. The first kind of options that come with respect when you are written cause and effect is similar to what is given in assertion and reason. The fact that cause is correct, effect is correct, and they both follow. Cause is correct, effect is correct, but independently, but they do not follow. Third, cause is correct, effect is wrong. Cause is wrong and effect is correct, and both of them are incorrect. This is the first question type where you have these kind of options. In the second question type, where you are just written as given statements written as 1 and 2, the options that come to you are in the form of saying that statement 1 is cause and statement 2 is effect, or statement 2 is cause and 1 is effect, or both the statements are causes, or both the statements are effects and neither. The fact that both of them are not related by any way. We have only a few minutes left, so I would ask you guys to just quickly pose any questions or any doubts you have as to understanding of these questions with respect to verbal reasoning or critical reasoning, and we'll quickly see. If we have a few minutes left, we'll try to practice a few more questions. We've tried to cover all the different concepts with respect to verbal reasoning and critical reasoning, as well as all the question types that are there with respect to any of your examinations, whether it's IIFT, CLAT, IPM, SET General, SET Law. Guys, any questions, please try and post. Anjani, in case you have lost connection, please don't worry. The video is recorded and it will be uploaded soon on YouTube. Also on our Hitbullseye website, I think there are a lot of free videos on YouTube that you can always find, which are talking about verbal reasoning and critical reasoning in detail. So don't worry about it. Also, this video will be uploaded soon, so you can catch up on this one as well. Yes, Shraddha, I'll quickly do FIJs because nobody else has any more doubts. So I'll tell you what FIJs are very quickly, very briefly. So F stands for the facts, I for the inferences, and J for judgments. Okay. Remember, facts are everything. We just talked about what facts are, right? Facts are the general truth, something that can be verified. Again, facts contain data, numbers, details. So any line that has any kind of data, any kind of number, percentage, year, fractions, details, specific kind of nouns, that becomes a fact. So it is very easy to identify facts. The next easiest to identify are judgments. What are judgments? Judgments in general life, if somebody asks you what are judgments, you would come to know if somebody is trying to give you a opinion. So any kind of opinion is definitely a judgment. Anything that is quoted also becomes a judgment. Somebody who's trying to tell you something, again, any kind of final answers, any kind of explanations, again become judgments. Why is it again easier to identify judgments? Because any line that contains adjectives and adverbs becomes a judgment. So if I say Ram is a good boy, it is not a fact, it is not an inference, it is a judgment because I had the word good in it. Good being an adjective makes this statement a judgment. Inferences. What are inferences? Remember the basic definition about inferences, what we had learned, what we understand on the basis of what is given to us. Again, inferences are the least easiest to identify. So what I usually suggest my students is, when you are given a question, you usually have a couple of lines. Say you have 4 lines, and even if you are able to identify 2 statements out of these 4 lines, it's okay not to be able to identify all the 4 lines. But if you're able to identify even 2 lines, all you have to do is just eliminate options. So say I have identified that the first is a fact and the last is a judgment, and I have 3 or 4 options. So all you have to do is check for the options that have F and J at the last. Remember the option elimination technique, it's pretty easy to identify. Also, I'm sure we have numerous videos on reasoning. There might also be videos or PDF uploaded on the Hitbullseye website. You can check that out. This is a very brief session on FIJs. There are way more techniques on FIJs that have to be elaborately done. This was just a quick overview. So to check out all those techniques, visit the website, check out the videos, check out the free content on our website. No Vidushi, specifically only in the cases of FIJs, no fact will have an adjective. Facts only have datas, details, numbers. Whenever there is a statement that has adjectives, it becomes a judgment. I'm not saying this in general sense, but only in the cases of the FIJ questions. Okay guys, great. That's it for today. I'm wrapping up, signing off with the big bull. If there's any feedback, anything else that you guys would like to ask, share, please go ahead. Great guys, thank you for being on the session with me. Have a great day. All the best for your exams. Do really well. See ya. Bye-bye.